Howdy y'all, this is AR Cavally and welcome back to my channel. We're going to do another product review, another solo game that I came across where you delve the depths of mind-gripping cosmic horror, where you explore ruins, cyclopean ruins left by unknown and terrifying creatures from millions of years ago. No, Screamer, it's not the awful green things from outer space. I know. It is instead Across a Thousand Dead Worlds by Alex T. from Black Oath Games. And this is a pretty hefty volume, so it might be a little bit of a longer review as we step through it. And I have plans of maybe not doing like a full campaign or anything, but maybe just doing a video of how to do things through it. This is designed for solo, but it can be played, of course, with a GM. And it's a space horror genre. The one thing about a space horror genre, well, I mean, there's a couple different things, but you have to have some specific considerations. Running a campaign in a space horror genre can be difficult because in order to do that, you have to have the same character basically being exposed to these space horror situations, like every week or every campaign. Some, like Hostile, the 2D6 aliens-like setting by Zoser Games, it posits that the characters do other things in between. Right, there's a wide range of things that you can do. Not all of them are space horror. You can be on the crew of your ship, space marine, whatever. And not everything has to be a space horror game. The Aliens RPG has I think they call it the cinematic mode, where it's just a short. You play different shorts with different characters. But if you try to run like a consistent space horror campaign using the same characters, it can almost get farcical. So you have to have a good reason why these average people are constantly faced with these space terrors, these cosmic terrors. Really the most reasonable way to do that is that they belong to an organization, or that they actually have a reason to go seek it out. And so where these things are rare or legendary to regular space people, the characters are in a position where they have to constantly interface. Some of those things might be like the X-Files kind of thing, where they work for a government organization, or a game called Void, which is like a Cthulhu space game. I like that pretty well, and it's for they work for a group where they're all wardens, I think they're called. In Across Thousand Dead Worlds, we're working for the Drake Corporation, who basically found an alien space station built into an asteroid in our system. And of course, it's the dystopian future. Earth is destroyed. Corporations run everything, fairly common. And the Drake Corporation got this asteroid. On this asteroid are hundreds or thousands of these little alien ships. They don't really know much about the aliens. They don't even speak their language, but they figured out that these alien ships have pre-programmed destinations in them, so they send these crews called deep divers, and they're contractors. For legal reasons, they're contractors. And part of your character creation is figuring out what you did before and why you fled Earth. Because everyone wants, a lot of people want to be deep divers because you can earn money, you get off of Earth, and you're exploring the galaxy. But you never know where the ship's going to go unless somebody has taken that ship, because each ship has one program, a destination, and it goes there and it comes back. So you never know where you're going to go, where you're going to end up, unless it's one of these ships that has already been logged and another crew has come back and said this is what's on the other end. And it makes for a good setting where you are constantly you have an incentive to constantly interact. Part of the interaction, part of being on this Karun station, which is the alien stuff is in the middle of the asteroid, and then they built a station around it. It has an element of the "oh my soul to the company store," because you don't get to live there for free. You have to pay for your medical bills. You have to pay for your for your housing. And so if you stay there and you don't keep going on these missions, they don't take cash. They only take the Drake coins, which is what you get when you bring back artifacts. They buy them using the Drake coins, and so it's a you owe your soul to the company store. If you have missions that aren't that profitable, now you start having to scrape, and you get to pick what level you live as, whether you're like sharing in kind of a common room, or you get your own little one room apartment, or if you've got enough, you can kind of live high on the space hog, as it were. And so you're incentivized to go through that and interface with those. A lot of people leave, then they just get kicked off the station and probably get charged for their ride home. But this is a pretty hefty tome. There's a lot in it, so let's go ahead and take a look. All right, now I bought the upgraded special version. I think it's the same. It's the same book, just comes with a couple of extras. The book itself it has a stitched binding, thick pages, high quality pages, and a lot of the pages have the black background, which I like. It's easy on the eyes, and you see the font is pretty big. My special version, that was, I think, like a Kickstarter, leftovers from the Kickstarter campaign, come with this little slip case. That's part of it. This mission operations reference manual. Now, the physical copy came with as part of the special edition. What do they call it? There's a term for it. It's one of the game terms. A Murgo, the Murgo edition. And I'll put a link to where you can get this stuff. And in fact, Alex T set up like a little shop, and I guess he shipped some copies over to the U.S. so that people in the U.S. could buy them without having to pay the pretty high shipping costs. This is also available as a free download, easily printed out. So I think all of them come with these tokens. And as you can see, they're just characters and monsters. The Murgo edition also comes with this cute little folder with hard copies of the various sheets for the game, which of course I'm never going to write on those. I'm just going to print them out, but it is kind of nice. You could put other notes in there. Unfortunately, it's just a little bit too small to shove like anything else in there, to fit. And then the game itself also comes with these double-sided tactical maps. The Murgo edition, I think, comes with 3 extra sheets, I think. But it's a mix of station and planet side, and then facilities on the planet side. It's a pretty good mission. And I like the aesthetic. I like the blueprint look to them. And these are what you use to move your little tokens around. All right, let's get these. Let's get you guys out of the way here. A lot of stuff. Playing the game, if you're gonna, if you're gonna play it physically, definitely can generate a lot of paperwork, a lot of forms. And it's kind of cool because a lot they're described as being corporate forms, the site survey forms and things like that. All right, so starting off, the cover's great. Comes the inside artwork is pretty great too. Well, the inside artwork is black and white, which I don't really have a problem with that, but all right. There's an intro describing how things happened. Earth is ruined. Drake Corp company found this satellite, or found this ancient space station from the Arsi, which is it's like Gaelic for ancient ones or something. All right. So when you create your character, this is a D20 system, or a form of a D20 system. The way it's designed is it's all a point buy, but and that does kind of, you have limited number of points, so it does kind of make a lot of the characters kind of seem samey, as far as that goes, because your stats are not going to change all that much. Whenever you make your character, when you talk about buying your skills and your attributes, attributes, that's pretty much going to be your character. You don't gain a lot of skill points and you don't gain a lot of attribute points. So when you make it, when you decide the concept, buy into that concept, because it's not like you're going to go out there and then suddenly switch over to being close combat necessarily, because you're not going to have a lot of points to increase it. So maximum of 18. And so usually what you get is you can go 10s across the board. You have enough points to go 10 across the board, or to max one of them out at 18, pretty much. And then you have some secondary attributes: luck, stamina. We'll go over that in combat, but it's basically used to buy actions in combat. Stress. It has a pretty good stress mechanic, which of course all horror games, well, I wouldn't say necessarily they need to, but a lot of horror games have stress mechanics that to keep track and represent, the effect on a person's psyche. Now this uses wounds instead of hit points. It uses a system that's really, it's a lot like Savage Worlds. Basically, you have a Constitution attribute, and when they roll damage, they're not rolling what they take off of hit points. They're rolling to see if they can get over your Constitution plus armor, and if they can, you take a wound. All right, we'll go over the wounds in general, but you have 3 wounds. On your 3rd wound as a character, you die. You're done for. The enemies and the aliens, they also have wounds, and when you take a wound, you also take a specific injury that can have other in-game effects, the graphic injury. This uses the D20 system. It uses if you make an attribute check, you're rolling D20 plus your attribute. If you're using a skill, it's D20 plus your skill. If it's just a regular skill point, not opposed, not in combat, the target is always 20. And the list of skills is designed to be, short list, broader. Sometimes sometimes it's the skills basically just replicate an attribute. Um, so like for manipulation, I'm not sure why you'd have manipulation instead of just making a charisma roll, because they don't add together. You don't get a charisma bonus. You either use charisma or you use manipulation. And since you're, if it were a random roll, I could see maybe using the skill to counter a low stat, but everything's point buy, so you pick whether you have these things. But like manipulation, um, in resolve especially, because resolve is basically just a synonym for willpower. So some things you roll willpower and some things you roll resolve. Um, so in resolve is one of those because as written, it helps you recover from combat conditions where if you get knocked out, you have to make this resolve roll, or sorry, you make a will roll to get up, but you make resolve to resist stress. So you definitely want a good resolve, and you're going to want a good combat skill too, and probably the R-side technology, because if you don't find anything, you have an ability to scavenge, but that's the roll, and you've got to get it starts off at -5, so you have to get extra points in it. So that's definitely a good one to put stuff in. Now, as you gain levels, it's like every 2 levels you gain a skill point. So as you can see, you're not going to bump your skills up very fast. Every 3 levels you get an attribute point. What starts differentiating your character are talents. Now you get a talent every level. The first level you get a pick, and then after that it's all random, and they just represent tricks that you have picked up in your time scavenging across the galaxy. Now they are random, so that, whether you like that or not, uh, it does lead to a point to where some of these talents are not. Now, frankly, they're not going to be very useful to certain characters. You don't have that ability, So if you like say you build a melee character and you didn't put a bunch of points into ranged combat, which, like I said, I would suggest maxing out ranged combat, and because you're always going to fight, even if you're some kind of science wonk or whatever, you're always going to be fighting. I would definitely say put max into your fighting abilities, both ranged and close combat. But say you don't have, say you decide you're just going to swing around your space battle axe or whatever, um, like aim, deal double damage on your next attack if it's with a ranged weapon. So if you get that, you've got to make your next attack, and you're probably going to miss it, frankly. So some of them are, but it's a good range, and some of them are pretty interesting. Now you roll for your background, how do things that happened in the life, life path kind of things, how you got there. They don't necessarily um, change change too much, but they're good for role play. Like I had one of the random events on a trip when I'd made some PCs was that there was a character interaction, a social interaction, and a secret got let out. Well, it just kind of started, but one of the characters involved had money that they got through illicit ways, and so I played on that, and it turned out to be kind of an interesting little social. Okay, and then everything else drives. You pick up. You have mannerisms for things, nervous ticks. Those you roll, or you can pick. Um, Either way, and then you start with a certain amount of great coins to buy gear. Now I say buy gear, you're actually leasing it. Whenever you go on a mission, the company provides you a basic package. Now you can lease equipment, meaning that you buy it and then after that point you can buy it whenever you want, or you can use it whenever you want to. Which would also which also means that you don't get to inherit fallen comrades gear because it goes back to the company store, which is kind of an interesting concept. So here we talk about improving your character. Those are the what I was talking about. All right, now that we're getting into the rules, I'm just one of the biggest hits against this book, and um, I would say it's a pretty big hit. Is there's no index of contents. There's a table of contents, and some of this will lead you where you need to go. And some of the rules are basically loops. Like when you're exploring, you use the same couple of tables to see what happens, this happens, and then you go back, resolve it. And those loops, some of those are not even really pointed out to very well in the table of content. Um, but this game is packed. I mean, it's a huge book, but it is packed with tables, and there's no index of where these tables are at, and it's really kind of an issue because when I was getting used to playing this game, I would have to go and search the PDF to find references, and that really is a drag. And now in for some of the common processes that you're going to use, the where's it at? This reference manual for mission operations that you can print out or comes with, it will tell you pages for some of the things, but not all of them. So here, there's the carousing table, page 332, and the carousing is one of those things that you do in between. But if you come over here, if you're back on the station, there's no way you would know where the carousing table is. It talks about stuff that you can do, or if you say, oh, well, I know that there's a carousing table, where is it? There's no way to find it. This is a huge book, and there's no way to find that. In a lot of the places where it does refer, it tells you to go someplace, it will tell you the page, but it's very spotty. In fact, that conversation I was talking about earlier, it says roll on the conversation subject table. There is no way, if you just have the physical book, that you can find that table unless you have it memorized. This book needs, like, immediately, just if I continue to play it, I will work my own up. But what would be a very helpful download is just a PDF that's just an index of tables, alphabetical, so that when it tells me to roll on this particular table, I can just look over there and flip to the page. And we'll, like, if you want to look at NPCs, it's in the Game Master area over here. I take it, not necessarily the NPCs, but the tables, the NPC tables, not NPC tables, like 243. See, that's in the Game Master emulation section for NPC quirks, NPC nature, character names. Right there, NPC is not even in that. So you would have to search on the PDF. So I'm not going to belabor that point, but to me that's a big hit against this. It really needs an index, even if it's just a PDF. And if there is a PDF already and I just didn't find it, then that's my bad. But it makes learning the situation or the game pretty hard. And some of the portions of the game are a little fiddly, or in depth. Would be a better way to put it. Okay. Um, so like I said, it's an attribute check or skill check, and everything's on a D20. Um, Now the game uses modifiers and advantage and disadvantage. Usually the best use of disadvantage is so that you don't worry about the modifiers. Right? You're either rolling normally and you get to pick the best or the worst die based if it's really hard or not, or you use those things, these modifications. Um, and it's nothing that's a game killer, but when you're rolling multiple d20s and then having to go and modify those d20s, there were some times, especially in combat, where I thought it was just a little too much. Okay, gear is a very important part of the game because while your character itself does not necessarily change too much, it doesn't get super stronger or much better at what it's doing. Um, the gear that you can lease from Drake definitely has some effects. Increased, you get things that start increasing damage, you get things that start increasing accuracy, medicines, and even cybernetics. But there's a big jump in between the basic stuff, or I should say a big jump in cost between the very basic stuff and the things that really start kicking ass. All right. Now, as far as combat is designed to be played on a map, and essentially you roll up what the threat's going to be, and then your party and the bad guys get put on the map in random locations. I'll talk about some of the issues that I came across as we go through combat. Overall, it's pretty simple. It has a pretty good way of you can just use this. You can just print out one of these sheets and then apply random cover, full cover, and half cover. And you can even put several on the same sheet to come up with your battle map. All right, so it basically uses a action economy based on the stamina stat for characters. You have 10 stamina points each turn, which can be modified. Like if you're underwater or in zero G, sometimes conditions will affect what your stamina per turn. But you spend those stamina points to do these different things. Now, when I did a review of Sacrifice by Alex T, and in there it uses sacrifice. It uses stamina, but those stamina points are only usable on these very few specific combat maneuvers that you learn as you gain levels. If I remember correctly, I made a comment where it'd be kind of cool if you just had stamina and a common list of moves that would give you more tactical options. And that's what they've done here. You have 10, and you can make multiple attacks. You can do multiple things. Standard attack, and then a fast attack if you have the right weapon. Some of those are some of your moves are definitely limited by your gear. I hope that's not too glossy, but or too reflective. So if you have the standard pistol, it's quick, and so you can make basically 3 attacks with it, although there's a penalty to shooting them. But you make those 3 attacks. If you have a heavy attack, depends, again, on the type of weapon, if it can make it, you can spend 8 stamina to make a powerful attack. All right. And so it's just a list of things you can do. Defensive maneuvers are basically you can save points to make it harder to be hit. It's basically like it doesn't use armor class, it uses opposed rolls for all of its combat, but you can use you can increase your roll by these defensive maneuvers. You can split it up, you can use it all against one person. It's kind of cool. And in melee, the defensive maneuvers, the one thing I was thinking is that you really should be able to use those as offensive maneuvers too, to represent trying better to hit in melee, because whoever wins the contested roll hits the other. You're basically doing that. If they attack you and you put your defense, you're basically increasing your chance of hitting them. So I think allowing offensive maneuvers only makes sense. But all that to say is that the stamina acts as the action economy, lets you do different things. So you have that, and you can move 1 hex per round. Doesn't seem like a whole lot on that small map, but if it's if you're fighting against some monsters, they can move 2 or 3, and you can shoot a lot of bullets and laser beams at someone before they take 2 or 3 steps. So combat, and the combat resolution with close combat, it's the character's close combat plus d20 versus the critter's attack attribute and d20. If it's ranged, it's your ranged combat versus their dexterity. And then if you are successful, you roll your damage roll, compare it to the constitution and any armor that the target has. If over, then you get you've gotten through and have knocked them down. The hit locations come into play. It's a little, you have armor that covers hit locations, but it's kind of disconnected from this roll right here. But this is added to whatever you roll. So most weapons, with characters starting off, they're going to be doing 2d10 damage, 1d10 base, and then plus d10 for all of the regular weapons that they usually get, or that are available to them early on. And then this number is added to that. And as I said, armor makes it harder to get through, so it basically adds like it's going to your constitution. There's some different area of effect weapons, and there's some interesting critical hit. Here are some different maneuvers that you can do. Suppressive fire, you select like 3. If you have a full auto weapon, it automatically uses up ammo, but you select 3 hexes and then any adjacent hexes, and then any critter that moves or any foe that moves in there automatically has a damage roll against them from the weapon. Now for me, I took that one step farther just because it makes sense that if it's in range and you can have enemies in 3 successive hexes, that you're just doing the same thing. You don't need them to walk into it. You can just spray the area and then damage them. Of course, it goes through a lot of ammo. But Overwatch, Desperate Attack, Escaping. And there are some good examples spread throughout the book, and those are always helpful. So there's an optional rule for lingering damage, which basically means if you're fighting something tough, and it can be helpful if you start getting frustrated to where you're finding you're just not doing enough damage. Each time you hit them, you add a d4. All right, so here's your injuries. You roll on this d20 whenever you take a wound. And then occasionally you might get a critical injury, which is some of these are basically permanent and not very good for you. And those those make for some pretty interesting, and it ramps up the tension of the fact that you can't really say, oh, well, I've got, I'm just taking a wound. That's not a big deal, because that one wound can really mess you up. It can apply a lot of different effects to you. If you don't like the maps, you can do a zone-based combat. And you can sneak through. You can sneak through. It takes more time. I'll get to the time when we've earlier, because being a space horror game, resource management is, the name of the game. These are just talking about different conditions. I got radiated. I had to spend $500 to get the rads out of my body because they don't go away. You can get treated, but you keep the rads, basically. All right, we'll get over. We'll talk about stress here in a moment. I'm going to talk about some of the issues that I've found using combat. Let me get a couple of the guys. Here. I could find a volunteer. Now there are a lot of options, and there are a lot of overall. I think the combat system's pretty cool. It does a good job of keeping things interesting and offering options. But there are two things that I kind of ran into as a problem for me anyway. When you do a knockdown, basically they come over, and if they're in range and you hit them, roll over their constitution and armor. I'll just flip them over to show that they're knocked down. They're knocked down. Now they're like literally knocked down on the ground. Although I, of course, see it more in the sense of, maybe they're shaken or, freaked out. They're pulling back. But that's it. And so from a conceptual level, to wound something, they have to be knocked down. So from a conceptual level, if, say, you're fighting a janitor, and you hit them with what I call the janitor problem. If you hit them with your shotgun, 30 points to their face or whatever, they just get knocked down. And then you have to use another action or your next turn to shoot them and kill them while they're on the ground. The problem that I ran dozens of battles with multiple numbers of groups on both sides, solo versus many, 3 people versus 6, and all this stuff. Is you hit them on your turn and they get knocked down, if you're lucky enough to actually knock them down, because a lot of these critters, they're tough. It's a space horror game. So the fact that that they're tough and you're shooting them with your shotgun, that doesn't necessarily blow them to pieces. That's understandable to a certain extent. But what I found happened so many times was I shot, hit, knocked them out, and then maybe used my second shot. It wasn't enough to penetrate. So they make their roll to recover. Once they make that roll to recover, you look up and see how that affects them, because depending on how they react, some of them might try to run away, some of them get stronger, and then they take their turn, and then you shoot them. Oh, got them. And once an enemy has been knocked down, they roll with disadvantage, so it makes for physical tasks. So it can make it a little bit easier to fight them, but it doesn't affect their ability to recover, and it doesn't affect their ability to resist damage. And so what I just found over and over is monsters and people too going knocked down. Stuff happens, they come back up, turn next turn, a turn later, you go back down into knockdown because there's no real rule for beating somebody up once they've been in knockdown, except that if they're in knockdown, that's the only way you can kill them. That's the only way you can do that is if they're knocked down. So conceptually, again, with the janitor problem, that bothers me because there should be if you roll a critical as written, if you roll a critical, that just means you automatically knock them down. I had, depending on how tough the monsters are, some of them, the the only time I could ever actually hit them was with a critical, and so in order to follow up with that, you need another critical basically. And so it got to the point where I was just tired of doing the combats because sometimes it would just it, it just wasn't fun using that. Now other people may have different experiences. I know like in Savage Worlds, it has, like I said, it has a similar combat where if you hit them but not hard enough, they just become shaken and then they have to recover. Well, you could get into this situation where you'd hit them one turn, they'd recover, but when they recovered, all they did was now they recovered, they didn't get the rest of their turn. So next turn you might do the same thing, and then they'd be shaken again. And this kind of knock lock, as I called it, got very frustrating for me at times. Um, so for me, I just took out the knockout thing. If you hit them, they took wounds. Now it does make things a little less, it, maybe a little less cosmic terrifying because now you can just shoot the things. But if you're fighting some local fauna that's the size of a rabbit or our poor janitor, and you shoot them with a shotgun right in their face, all you do is knock them over. So just conceptually, like I said, that bothers me. And in actual play, I had several battles, especially when you have, because some of these encounters that you roll, depending on the level of the encounter, you might be fighting 10 critters. And now you have to keep track of what happens if they recover. Are they recovered? That and it just adds too much for me. So I'm not going to use that. The another thing I came across in the combat is because it is opposed rolls to make to make those hits. In combat, it's the attack roll versus their attack skill versus your unarmed combat. And so a lot of times he's basically 50-50 unless they're super strong. So the idea that someone can win the melee, I like that. I like that aspect of it. But when it came to shooting, you're starting off, if you've pumped full scale into into your ranged combat, you're adding +10. Most of the critters have 11 or 12. I had one that got up to 16. And so it was nearly impossible to hit them. And again, it is one of those, you should not expect to be able to beat the all of the monsters and stuff. But these are not necessarily like the tough monsters. And it just got to be to a point where it just seemed like it was very hard to shoot anything. And it was a lot easier to just use melee combat because the attack values on most of the creatures, they're, say +5 to +10. So that's much more evenly matched. And you get, it seems like I didn't have that same problem. So And I tried a couple of ways. I decided for some of the combats to just use a target number of 20. Because even when they start rolling at disadvantage because they're been knocked down, um, it seemed a lot of the combats were very whiffy using with the ranged combats especially. Another thing that kind of came up was, let's see, maybe it's more when you place enemies on the map, when you place the sides on the map, they're on the map edge. And I had a lot of fights. If you escape off the edge of the map, then you've escaped. Kind of like a video game. You go to the next area and the monsters don't follow. And so a lot of times what I would have is these guys come forward, and if you have like a range 7 with your submachine gun, you fire. Move back. They come. Fire. Fire. And then you're off the edge. So there's really, and if you start on the edge, there's no stress for trying to escape. Now some of these maps do have, you can use it where it might have, say, a ship hole where you have to actually go through a specific exit. That works a little better because then you actually do have to fight your way out. But on some of these maps, especially out in the outside, all you have to do is step off the map. So you just shoot at them as they approach, and if you don't kill them before then, you just step off the map and you're free to go. Now, I like the idea of fleeing because you have no incentive to fight something you don't have to fight. And some of these monsters are meant to be very terrible and hard to fight. So I do like the idea of the incentive of not fighting, but it kind of takes all the tension away if you just can step off the edge of the map where you started. All right, so stress is the mechanic that a lot of space horror games have, and this stress mechanic, you build up stress as certain things happen. You can make a resolve test to drop it, and as your stress level builds up, there are different effects from just your nervous tick to some kind of reaction. Now the reactions are kind of cool because it just randomly determines what might happen and whether you're with others or if you're by yourself, and it affects us. And I had one where I went I went binging on a ship and ate a bunch of food, and I had just started the trip, so I didn't know what was coming up. And then week 2, I had a malfunction that destroyed more rations. So, and you can't turn around. So that's part of the stress of the trip. You can't turn around. You're there for the long haul. And in that particular case, it did turn out to only be like a 2-week trip. But if it had been a longer trip, I would have starved to death probably because I'd gone through all my food. One thing that this game does well that I like that some solo games don't really do is it has an interaction system between PCs, right? So if 2 PCs can have a beef, you can generate what they fight about and what the outcome of that is. In fact, this is a lashing out. One lashes out, and then you roll to see if the other one responds. There are ways to lose stress, and if you get a certain amount of stress, you start getting traumas and negative traits. So the stress mechanics are pretty cool. And then you also have an emotional trigger track, which is it's kind of an add-on thing. I only really used it once, but keeping track of the emotions of your crew is cool. All right, playing the game. This is where you start going through. You schedule the mission, and you pick the ship based on how many people are going to go. The 1-person, 3-person, or 5-person. You can go, if you're playing solo, you can go as long as you have 2 NPCs. One of the groups that I made when I was playing through was actually 3 NPCs. Or sorry, not 3 NPCs, but 3 PCs. I made them all through the normal character design process and set them out. There is a way to make NPCs, and the NPCs do not have as many attributes, and it doesn't take nearly as long to, they're not as fleshed out. They have attributes, but they don't have skills. Let's see. Where are we at? Our NPCs. Oh, where'd they go? Oh, of course. The one sheet I didn't grab. All right, now in the back, it is just a couple of tables, and you build the NPCs. There are arrays for the stats. They don't use skills. Instead, they use attribute checks. And I'll be honest, I'm almost tempted to just, or I was almost tempted at sometimes just to use attribute checks instead of those skills anyway, just for regular PCs. But it makes it easier to keep track of them and easily to replace. And if your PC gets killed, then you can just turn around and develop one of those guys if they manage to make it back. But I did do some combats with multiple monsters and 3 PCs, and then I did combats with multiple monsters and these NPCs. Using the NPCs is a lot more handy. There's fewer fiddly bits and everything to keep track of. So I suggest if you're going to do that, do that way. And one thing about the number that you pick, the enemies don't scale based on your level. Because like I said, your level doesn't really change that much about you. It scales based on how many people there are. Which in the one way seems a little counterintuitive because you're showing up somewhere and that shouldn't, the monsters, it's a game convention. To make it to scale versus the number of people. Because, of course, if you use the same chart for 1 person versus 5, well, that's not going to be great. Or it's not going to be very interesting. It'd be just as bad, just in the other direction. You make your spaceship name, and then this is where it starts the process, the game loop of starting the mission, flying out there, searching, and then coming back. These are the 1 per crew. This is the stuff that you get. And you'll notice that each ship comes with a value. This is what it can carry total. This is what's free because the company puts these things on the ship. And then this is what you get free when you start. Everyone gets as their basic mission equipment, their basic survival package. Now I know Drake Industries is supposed to be, kind of the bad guys and the corporate bastards and everything. But as written, they only give 6 oxygen tanks per crew member, knowing that the crew member, at least for a new site, may need up to 14. Bastards though they may be, I really don't think that they're going to send out people in a ship that they're not going to get back so that they will suffocate. So when I started doing mine, it was like they provided all the oxygen that would be needed, because the maximum trip length is 14 weeks if it's there and back. And so that's not even half of that. They have a limited inventory of these unique items. They're going to do everything they can. Well, maybe not everything, but they're not going to send them out so that they'll be dead when they get there and they never get their shit back. So that was something I modified. But now what you have, you need to supply more if you want more than that. All right. Now, when you're traveling through the destination, as it says, it's the worst part of the experience, and it can be because you're basically there, and every week you go out there, there's a cumulative chance of something happening, and it could be social, which is kind of the more interesting. Um, but you have someone have a mental or physical breakdown, space anomalies, ship malfunctions. Um, so a long and interesting mix of things that can go wrong that can happen. Most of those troubles are involving the things that Drake Industry has added to the ship because the ship itself is Spartan. It just floats off the ground and it has a hatch, and you get in and you tell it and you get it to go. I don't know if it has a button or whatever, but and then it flies off in its little warp bubble, and then when you're done, you fly back. That's all it does. There's no screens, there's no controls. Everything that's added is added by humans, and those are often what causes it. When you get there, you roll to see where the ship stops, assuming everyone's alive, and there is a 2% chance that you will fly into a sun that was not quite so big, a million years ago, or whenever this thing was. All right. So, like I said, tracking resources is always an important part of, well, a lot of exploration games and horror games, and this is both. You have time. You track time on the ship because each week uses up oxygen and supplies. When you get to site, you track time, and it's basically you have 6 10-minute time tracks for 1 hour. When you fill these up, that's described as resetting the time track. And then you come back around, mark that you've spent an hour. At the end of that hour, everyone uses a oxygen pellet, a battery, and ammo if they use their weapon during the previous thing. Some maneuvers that you do automatically use your spare ammo, but this system, it kind of goes kind of makes a compromise between using a resource die, which I don't like resource die, and a cinematic, because you do have to keep track of your ammo, but you just lose 1 ammo if you were in a gunfight during that time. So here are the things that cause you to use time. So if you use stealth, it takes 2 points, or it takes 2 just to show that you're moving slower. Entering combat, exploring a site. Completely exploring a site, I think it really means exploring an area, which the site is built into different areas. And so you have to you have to take breaks every now and then you have to start deciding. You can carry a lot of oxygen pellets, so if you just spend a little bit of money, you can really increase the amount of time you can spend on a site. But you have to keep care of your oxygen, because every planet you go to is going to be you need oxygen on it. So you generate the site, and I generated a lot of very interesting kind of sites. As described, you come up with what it was, what happened to it, its overall site descriptor, how dangerous it is, how active it is with our known threats, which are type of monsters. And so you build the site, and then you explore. Now, every time you move into an area, that takes one of those little 10-minute time ticks, and then you roll here. Now, what I had started to say is I created some very interesting sites that were, just a mix of different things. And part of the solo gaming, reading those oracles and kind of coming up with what that means, especially if some things don't make sense. I made a planet that was a freezing atmosphere, but the biome was scorching, And so how did that work? I just assumed that um, that there was a zone that you could walk next to the scorching lava flows and stuff where the temperature was was acceptable. And so, but a lot of stuff the whole point of what you're doing is you're looking for resources and artifacts, and these are the different events that you can run into. Encounters are the monsters, and every planet has the set of monsters that they found everywhere. Guardians and what do they call them? These known threats. Yeah, guardians and the known threats of chasers. That's what I was looking for. But they're a common set of monsters that they find on all these R-side planets. And then you also have a process for building other monsters that might, they might be aberrations, they might be local fauna or whatever. And so what you're doing is you're scavenging alien technology. That's the whole point of what you're doing there. And then you just go through the loop. You could travel to an area, see what happens, and resolve the encounter, move to the next area. Then you go through that, mark your resources, basically until you run out of resources or maybe you get beat up enough. And fortunately, it does a good job of presenting a bunch of different challenges. It's not just monsters. There are a lot of things that you have to deal with. There's dread events, which basically, you just start freaking out. So it does a really good job of making it so that it's not just you going and fighting monsters every time. And the book is full of, like I said, it's full of these very juicy tables. One table that I found missing, and really its lack of is noticeable only because there's so many other good tables, is that there's not really good room descriptors or area descriptors. You just go into an area, you have an idea of what the whole site is overall. But one of the roles that you can get is a situation. And so when I was looking to add description to the room, I just came over here and I'd roll on the verb and a noun based on whatever type of site I was in, a tomb, refinery, whatever. And then I would come up I would roll and then figure out what it was. Okay, well, this is some kind of guard barracks. This is a waste plant, something like that. All right, here's another good example of the flow. It doesn't go into a lot of details for its rolls, but it's still a good example. Now, when your ship lands, it can land directly on a site or it can land on a planet. And so if you land on a planet, you're not necessarily at the site, you explore the planet, and it has a cool planet generation system, climate, atmospheric density, the type of biomes, the diameter. All right, so these are things that you have to deal with, what's in the sky, as you're walking around the planet. Let's see, let's get a planet. All right, where's my planet map? I'll go back to the sites for a second. Now it suggests when you're making a site that you make a schematic of what that site looks like. And the little combat sheet actually works pretty well. You start here. It doesn't talk about how many ways out there are, but I start rolling a d4 to see how many ways in and out of an area there were. And so you just track it. And this way, you can look all those, you can kind of wander around. And if there's a spot where it's like, oh, well, you can't get through this door, then you don't have to just fly back to Karam Station. And so normally what I would do is I'd generate the area, generate what it looks like, and then write the effect, what happened in there. and then I have a little map. Now on a planet, the planetary exploration is kind of broken, actually, because in a site it's very specific. 10 minutes take, it takes 10 minutes to explore a site. 10 minutes is one time stamp. On the planetary, it's not quite so simple, and it doesn't match, and that's not great when you have a specific need to keep track of resources. And I asked Alex T about this on the Discord server, and I'll say that Alex T is there, and there's a FAQ, and he's always very willing to be helpful on there. But I will also say that I had to ask a lot of questions to clear things up, because it is kind of it's not a mess by any means, but there are a good handful of things that aren't very clear sometimes. So each one of these hexes is 3 miles across. And so if you split those up, even if you do an hour time tick per hex, that's a lot of stuff. I did some basic calculation. Google helped me, frankly. But with a 3 mile hex, you have an area of 5.9 miles. One of the easiest ways to kind of make the things sync up would be 1 hex per hour. You can explore 1 hex per hour. You don't worry about the individual 10-minute time slots, maybe unless you run into something on one of the encounters that make you expend extra time. And for those who are familiar, that's basically the same amount of area from Kingdom Come Deliverance, the player map. All right, so if that gives you any idea how much area there is in 5.9 square miles, and I did round a little bit. So two options that I kind of came up with is just to still be generous, but divide each hex into 6 areas. So that puts if you say it's the 3 mile hex, that puts it as 0.97 square miles. Still very generous to explore in 10 minutes, but the other thing you could do is if you change it down to 1 mile and do the same thing, and that changes it to 0.1 square mile in 10 minutes, which seems a little more doable. I don't know how married the map might be to using using 3 mile hexes, but those are some options I came up with. I'll be using one of those. In another situation, it would be okay for it to be abstracted somewhat, but we're talking about you have to count your oxygen or you die. So there needs to be a straight conversion on that, even if it's a simple one. So in this one, I generated the map just with the planet with these things. Here's how many hours of daylight, nighttime does a planet have. Now I would say anything over maybe 100 hours, because there's not an option for tidal locked, which is pretty common in our solar system and in some of the planets, our exoplanets we found. And tidal locked, if you don't know, just means that the planet, like our moon, is tidally locked around to the Earth, which means that it rotates at the same rate as it goes around the planet or its host, whether it's the sun or whatnot. And so the same side is always facing. So if it's tidally locked, it's always going to be daytime or always going to be nighttime, or it's going to be that twilight right around the rim. All right, so each planet, each site has a number of monsters that you generate, and you keep track of the discoveries that you make. When you make a site, and this is something else that you determine the size of the site randomly, and then that determines how many resources you find or how many resources are available. unfortunately, that makes it almost impossible. That system makes it almost impossible to clear out a site. And I'll show you what I mean here. And I think it might have been maybe a little better to not worry about how many resources were there and just describe how many areas there are. Because when you're looking at your site encounter tables, whenever you explore an area, let's come back over here. Oops, too far. Whenever you explore an area, you roll on the table to determine what you find. Now, if you look here, you only have a 10% chance each time to find the resources. When you find resources, you find D10 and D4, or D6 of alloy cubes and data crystals. The on-site artifacts, you find D4. So if you just roll those things out, say I need to finish the site, there's 30. All right. So there's 30. If I'm generous and say every time I find one, I get the whole 4 things. So I'm going to have to get at least 8? I'm going to have to get 8 Xeno artifact results. Okay. Now, if I'm just going by a basic breakdown, if I need to get 8 results and it stays with the typical, percentage values, that means for every one of those, I'm going to have 9 that aren't. So that comes up with a lot of areas that, I mean, really possibly hundreds of areas that you might have to generate before you even find all of those things. So I think it might have been better to select a size so it has the number of areas, and then you determine, just through the tables and stuff, what you actually find there. Now, there is an option if you don't find a lot of treasure, you can do a scavenging roll per area and get so that you can get some money. But if as written, to clear out one of these sites all the way, you could generate 100 places, which your job, the game is exploring those things, so maybe that's not a bad thing, but I would prefer to kind of mix it up a little bit more than that, because it is a cool system to go run around exploring those things. So rules for the different biomes, and they have threats, hazards, and options based on the type, the type of site and the type of biome, which is pretty cool. So there's a lot of good encounters, a lot of good interesting sites, because some things you just see the sites. So the planet, except for that, the thing with the resources not matching, the planetary exploration is great. There's a lot of details, a lot of interesting sites, and same with the sites themselves. All right. So running the game, this is, basically this is where we start talking about, this is kind of the GM section I was talking about earlier. One thing with this game is you can play it as kind of a hex crawl, and actually it excels as a hex crawl because you can generate a site, and say even if you have some friends who play, they can each have their own list of sites, and you can even you can trade them back and forth. But you can send your group to one site for one mission and then go to some other site the next. But that original site is still there waiting to be further explored. And so that's a very cool aspect of this game. It really is the space crawler. You can make up some pretty interesting NPC details. And of course, with the NPC details, these are also very useful for your crew. If you were to decide to make 3 or 5 PCs to play with solo, or or just 3 or 5 NPCs, you could use them for either random conversations, and they have direct in-game effects. They affect stress and everything, so that's very cool. There's a discussion of the story arcs, and when it comes to doing a story, like I said, you could do it as just like a sandbox, but you can also add a lot of detail. You can go into depth and talk about, hey, here's, this is what they feel, this is what they see in this strange room, and you can come up with your own scenes. You can make a scene, you roll up, and not just using the encounter tables, right? You can have the encounter and then work it in with this scene and get a lot more narrative if you want to. There's a lot of room to be able to develop the stories. All right, and here's creating the antagonist. I'm not going to really go through with it, but you figure out how hard the encounter is, and then it tells you how many bad guys there are. And so, like right here, if you got a 3-member, you're talking 10, 9 creatures. The more rules you have to keep track of, the longer it gets. And I had, which one was it? I think I had one with 8 creatures, with my 3 people, and I played it through, just kind of touching back on the combat, played it through with or without the knockdown. And with the knockdown, I mean, it really started to drag out. So, not saying that it's impossible to use. It does add a couple of cool concepts to it, but that just to show that's how many creatures you might end up having to fight and keep track of. When if you're going to run a game for another group, if you make up a site, I highly recommend. I know we have a lot of zero prep GM stuff and whatnot, but if you're going to make up a site and the creatures, I would suggest doing all that before the game. Don't do it in game, because these sites have a lot of details, and it's not going to be fun for your players to sit there while you roll up. Now, you're just taking care of that beforehand, so you know what's going to be there. So that would just be a suggestion, because when you start making up, because some of the encounters, they're going to be the same critters, but they might be different levels. You might have a standard monster, a standard boogeyman, and then the elite version that they have to fight. And so you basically have to go through and generate different ones. It's not really complicated, but it can take some time because there's a lot of details and options. The monsters each have unique traits, possible abilities, a monster type, their role in combat, how they fight, that kind of thing. And so it can take a little while to do that. If you're doing solo, no biggie, because prep is play, as they say. So when you're making these weird creatures, it can that can be fun, just doing that. Now the Guardians, there are some of those that are, they have different levels, but they're found all over. And they're pre-made for you, though, so there's not a lot of difference with them. They're kind of the same, and same with the known threats. They're all the same. So you don't really have to generate them. Now, I said there was no incentive to fight the monsters, necessarily, except that if you do have a map, if you're using the hex map, or if you're maybe making a point map or schematic, obviously I would say if you either need to sneak by the monsters or defeat them to get beyond that path for searching. But there's a special tech that if you kill the known threats, and those guys are mean, they kill deep divers. They're tough and they're mean and they don't give up. So. And this last section talks about the station itself. There's a lot of interesting details, and one of the cool things that you can do is downtime. This is where you find this. If you get radiated, then you have to go. You have to go to the medical bay and pay for treatment. And there are tables for carousing and training, and it gives you, just information about what you'll find there, who you'll find there. And the results are, some are good, some are bad, some are just like little details that you can add in. You can train, study. And here's a map of the places, and it talks about where you are living, some rumor or news about the different corporations, what you might see on the TV at the bar. And then this is the procedure for making random NPCs. Everything is kind of cut down for them. Like you don't have to keep track of their stress as much. They just take 1 point of stress whenever the character takes any kind of stress. You don't clear it. You don't worry about it. You don't worry about them using stamina, or at least not as much. They have a defense stat, kind of like the critters, and they have their own little list of talents. And then we have our gear. And as you can see, there's kind of a big jump between the free pistol and maybe the revolver. You might spend a little bit, and the laser pistol, which is 1,200. Now, the money in the Drake coins act as two things. One, they act as experience points. So if you or your group sells 1,000 Drake coins worth of artifacts, then you get 1,000 experience points and you go up a level. Every 1,000, you go up a level. Now, as far as splitting, you have to split the profit, but that's how you gain. And then the money, what you buy, starts becoming very important, because then you start getting weapons that have different bonuses that do more damage. All right, and then you also, same with armor and other equipment and gear. And for every mission you can buy yourself, you can bring along extra oxygen pellets. The ones that you have to buy yourself, they're cheap, but you still have to buy them. And then in the end, there's two scenarios, which are, they're pretty well. They're pretty good. They're more like just the sites built, although the second one does have a little more info. So the overall effect of the game, it's a solo game, and its biggest strength is also kind of its biggest weakness, because it does describe how you are constantly put in these dangerous situations. But those are the only situations you're going to be put in. There's a lot of variation in between those, or within that limitation, right? There are a ton of different sites, a ton of monsters you're going to fight, a ton of planets, things that you're going to encounter, puzzles to solve, and things like that. But that's all you're going to do. You can incorporate some more social things on Karam Station, right? You can develop relationships and work with people, but you're not going anywhere else. You're not going to go out to a planet and find the homesteaders being attacked by space aliens or by raiders that you can go help. You're not going to find some lost derelict and solve the mystery, because all the sites you're visiting are completely alien, ineffable, and 150,000 to 1,000,000 years old. So even if the GM generates that this site was a medical research lab or something, everything is so alien. If you walk into a detention center or a quarantine center, probably not even going to know it. You would have really no way of figuring out what this site was, at least as described, right? Because you're not going to walk into a place that kind of looks like a conference room probably and say, oh, hey, this is a conference room. There are options or there are traits that allow you to, say, hack our side technology. But no one can read it. It's not even like you can find the conveniently placed um, computer RPG logs where, Zimbrak wrote 2 million years ago about the swarm of aliens that infested. There's no way to do that. There's no way to have any kind of interaction with people outside of Karam Station. Now, I will say that Alex T has said that he is making a supplement to this that's going to focus more on exploration. So we'll see what that looks like. Um, but compared to the similar games, like I would say Void or Starforged or Hostile, it's very limited in the type of adventures you can go on. Like I said, in one sense, it makes it easy to go through and do those things, but it also makes it a little, after you've explored the 10th site, even if the site itself is interesting, you're really kind of stuck in a loop of you roll the area, you search the area, and then you fly home. So it's interesting enough within those circles to give you a good long game, to give it a good life cycle. Um, but it is also just very limiting. So, and that's basically what I think. What do you think? I know there's been a handful of these out or reviews on this game out. I love the game. I love the project. I've spent a lot of time playing it and had a good time. And so I do enjoy it, and I don't regret spending the extra money to get the special fancy version. But that's my final one. It would be a hard, I think for me anyway, it'd be hard to make a long-term campaign stay interesting just because of the limited mission type. But it's still fun enough, and I had a good enough time that, I certainly am going to play it and break it out. But anyway, I hope that review was helpful. If I did get something wrong, then please feel free to leave a comment. And an hour 30 is a bit long for what I try to do, but like I said, this is a hefty tome with a lot of good stuff in it. So anyway, happy gaming, and we will see you next time. Salute.